The sun hung low over the Arizona territory, painting the barren landscape in hues of burnt orange and deep crimson. The year was 1882, and the small settlement of Cedar Ridge sat precariously on the edge of Apache lands, a collection of weathered wooden buildings that seemed to huddle together against the vastness of the desert. Dust devils danced across the main street, carrying with them the scent of sage and the promise of another scorching day. Reverend Thomas Whitfield stood at the window of his modest wooden house, watching the sun set behind the red rock formations that dominated the horizon. At 52, his once dark hair had turned the color of winter wheat, and deep lines etched his face, testament to years of hardship in this unforgiving land. His hands, roughened by labor rather than softened by the genteel life of Eastern ministers, clutched a worn Bible. "Father, supper's ready," called a gentle voice from behind him. He turned to see his daughter, Grace, setting 2 plates on their simple pine table. At 23, she possessed a quiet beauty that seemed out of place in this harsh frontier. Her auburn hair, inherited from her late mother, was pulled back in a practical bun, and her blue eyes held a warmth that had not been dimmed by the difficulties of their life. She wore a faded calico dress, mended in several places, but kept meticulously clean. "Thank you, my dear," Thomas said, taking his seat. The meal was meager beans, cornbread, and a small portion of preserved meat, but they bowed their heads in gratitude nonetheless. "Lord, we thank you for this sustenance and for another day of your protection." Thomas prayed, "We ask for your continued guidance and for peace between all your children in this troubled land. Amen." "Amen," Grace echoed, but her voice carried a note of weariness. The drought had been particularly cruel this year. The creek that ran past Cedar Ridge had dwindled to a trickle, and the few crops the townspeople managed to grow withered under the relentless sun. Tensions with the nearby Apache bands had escalated as both communities competed for the same scarce resources. Cattle raids had become more frequent, and retaliatory attacks from the settlers had only deepened the wounds between the two peoples. "Mrs. Morrison's baby took ill again today," Grace said quietly, breaking the silence. "I gave her the last of our willow bark tea." Thomas nodded approvingly. "You did right, child. The Lord calls us to serve others, especially in their time of need." "But what if we need it ourselves?" Grace asked, then quickly added, "I'm sorry, Father, I shouldn't question." "Never apologize for honest concerns." Thomas interrupted gently. "Faith doesn't mean ignoring reality. It means trusting that God will provide even when we cannot see how." After supper, they walked together to the small church at the center of town. It was barely more than a large room with rough-hewn benches and a simple wooden cross, but it served as both spiritual center and meeting hall for the community. Tonight, Thomas had called for a special prayer service, hoping to ease the growing fear and anger among his congregation. The church filled slowly. Men arrived with rifles slung over their shoulders. Women clutched their children close. The Barrett family sat in the front row, their faces drawn with grief. They had lost their eldest son in a skirmish with Apache warriors just 2 weeks prior. Behind them sat the Johnsons, the Millers, and old Samuel Crawford, whose ranch had been raided 3 times in as many months. Thomas stood before them, his voice carrying the authority of conviction despite the weight on his shoulders. "Brothers and sisters, I know these are dark times. I know that fear and anger fill your hearts. But I ask you to remember the words of our Savior. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God." A murmur rippled through the congregation. Jake Morrison, his face weathered and hard, stood up. "With all due respect, Reverend, pretty words won't bring back the Barrett's boy or Crawford's cattle. The Apache don't understand anything but strength. They understand survival, just as we do." Thomas replied calmly, "They see their lands taken, their way of life threatened. This doesn't excuse violence, but perhaps if we could find a way to—" "To what?" interrupted another voice. "Invite them to tea? They're savages. Reverend—" Grace winced at the harsh words, but her father remained steady. "They are God's children, same as us. Different, yes, but not beyond redemption or reason. The debate continued, voices rising and falling like the desert wind. Through it all, Thomas preached patience, understanding, and hope for peace. Some listened. Others sat with arms crossed and minds closed. As the service drew to a close, Thomas led them in a final prayer. Lord, grant us the wisdom to see past our differences, the courage to choose peace over vengeance, and the strength to endure these trials. Protect all your children, those within these walls and those beyond. In Jesus' name, amen. The congregation began to file out, their faces showing a mixture of contemplation and skepticism. Grace helped her father extinguish the oil lamps, working in companionable silence. Suddenly, the church door burst open. Young Timothy Johnson, barely 15, stumbled in, his face pale with terror. "Apache!" he gasped. "Coming this way! Dozens of them!" The remaining townspeople erupted in panic. Men shouted for their weapons. Women screamed for their children. Thomas raised his hands, trying to restore calm, but his voice was drowned in the chaos. Through the doorway, they could see them now. Apache warriors on horseback, their figures dark against the dying light. They moved with purpose, not charging but advancing steadily. At their head rode a man who commanded attention even from a distance, tall and broad-shouldered. He sat his horse as if born to it, his long black hair flowing free beneath a band adorned with eagle feathers. "Everyone, stay calm," Thomas shouted. But fear had already taken hold. The Apache warriors entered the town, their faces painted for war. Some carried rifles, others traditional weapons. The townspeople scrambled for cover, but the warriors seemed focused on something specific, or someone. The leader dismounted outside the church with fluid grace. Up close, his presence was even more imposing. His face bore the marks of many battles, a scar running from his left eyebrow to his jaw. His dark eyes burned with an intensity that spoke of deep purpose and deeper pain. He wore traditional Apache dress mixed with practical adaptations, leather leggings, a cotton shirt, and a vest decorated with intricate beadwork. He strode into the church as if he owned it, his warriors flanking him. His gaze swept the room before settling on Thomas. When he spoke, his English was accented but clear, each word chosen with care. "You are the one who speaks of the white God," he said. It was not a question. Thomas stepped forward, placing himself between the Apache leader and his congregation. "I am Reverend Thomas Whitfield. We mean you no harm." The Apache chief's lips curved in something that was not quite a smile. "No harm? Your people take our land, poison our water, kill our warriors. And you speak of no harm? I speak of peace." Thomas replied steadily, "Of finding a way for our peoples to..." "Peace?" The chief's voice rose. "There can be no peace while your people exist only to take..." His eyes moved past Thomas, scanning the frightened faces, before stopping on Grace. Something changed in his expression. The hardness remained, but beneath it flickered something else. Curiosity, perhaps, or recognition of something he couldn't name. Grace stood straight despite her fear, meeting his gaze with a courage she didn't know she possessed. "You are his daughter," the chief said, and again it was not a question. "I am," Grace answered, her voice steadier than her hands. The chief studied her for a long moment, then turned back to Thomas. "You preach that your God loves all, yet your people show no love to mine. Your words are empty, like wind through dead trees." "Not all of us," Thomas began, but the chief cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Enough. I have heard your words before. They changed nothing." He paused, his decision made. But perhaps it is time for lessons stronger than words. In one swift motion, he grabbed Grace's wrist. She gasped but didn't scream, even as her father lunged forward. "No! Take me instead!" Two warriors blocked Thomas, holding him back as he struggled. The chief pulled Grace toward the door, his grip firm but not cruel. "The daughter of the God Speaker comes with me," he announced, his voice carrying absolute authority. "Perhaps when she is gone, your people will understand loss as mine do." "Please!" Thomas fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. "She's innocent. She's done nothing to harm your people." The chief paused at the doorway. Looking back, neither had my sister, neither had my daughter. Yet they are dead by white hands. His gaze softened almost imperceptibly as he looked at Grace. I will not harm her, but she comes with me. Grace found her voice, though it trembled. Father, remember your own words. Faith means trusting even when we cannot see how. Grace, no. The daughter of the God Speaker is now mine, the chief declared. And with that, he led her from the church. The last thing Thomas saw was his daughter's face, pale but resolute. As she was lifted onto a horse, the Apache warriors mounted their own steeds, and within moments they were gone, leaving only dust and despair in their wake. Thomas collapsed on the church floor, his anguished cries echoing through the small building. The townspeople stood frozen, torn between pursuit and the knowledge that they were outnumbered. In the growing darkness, the reverend's sobs were the only sound, a father's heart breaking like the dry earth beneath the desert sun. The horses thundered across the desert floor, their hooves kicking up clouds of dust that glowed red in the last light of dusk. Grace clung to the warrior who held her, her body rigid with fear as the familiar landmarks of Cedar Ridge disappeared behind them. The chief rode ahead, his silhouette dark against the dying sky, leading his band deeper into Apache territory. They rode through the night without stopping. Grace's wrists were bound, though not tightly enough to cut off circulation. The warrior behind her was young, perhaps only a few years older than herself, and he held her steady when the horse navigated rough terrain. Despite her terror, she noticed he was careful not to let her fall. As dawn broke, painting the mountains in shades of rose and gold, exhaustion weighed heavy on Grace's shoulders. Her throat was parched, her body ached from the unfamiliar position, and fear gnawed at her stomach like a living thing. She forced herself to remember her father's sermons about Daniel in the lion's den, about faith in the face of impossible odds. The chief raised his hand, and the band came to a halt near a cluster of mesquite trees. He dismounted with the same fluid grace she'd observed before, his movements speaking of a lifetime spent in harmony with this harsh land. When he approached her, Grace instinctively shrank back. You need water, he said simply, producing a water skin. Grace hesitated, searching his face for signs of cruelty or deception. Instead, she found only a stern practicality. His eyes, she noticed, were not black as she'd first thought, but a deep brown flecked with amber. I'm not afraid of you, she said, though her trembling hands betrayed her words. Something flickered across his features. Amusement, perhaps, or respect. Good. Fear makes the journey harder. He held the water skin to her lips, allowing her to drink deeply. What is your name? Grace asked when she'd finished, surprising herself with the question. He studied her for a moment before answering. I am Naichi, in your tongue. It means mischief, though my mother hoped for different things when she named me. And did you? Grace asked. 'Cause mischief, once, now I cause war. His voice held no pride, only weariness. They resumed their journey as the sun climbed higher, the heat becoming oppressive. Grace noticed how the warriors moved with the landscape rather than against it, choosing paths that offered shade and cover. They were not the bloodthirsty savages the townspeople described, but men with purpose and discipline. By midday, they reached the Apache camp. It was not what Grace expected. Instead of the temporary collection of teepees she'd imagined, she found a well-organized community nestled in a valley between red stone cliffs. Wickiups, dome-shaped dwellings made of bent poles and brush, dotted the landscape. Children played between them. Women worked at various tasks, and the smell of cooking fires filled the air. Their arrival caused an immediate stir. Women and children gathered, their faces showing a mixture of curiosity and hostility. Some of the women spat on the ground as Grace passed. Others simply stared, their dark eyes unreadable. An elderly woman emerged from one of the larger wickiups, her gray hair braided with beads and feathers. She moved with the authority of a matriarch, and even Naichi showed deference as she approached. They spoke rapidly in Apache, the woman's voice rising in clear displeasure. She gestured at Grace several times, her meaning clear even without translation. "My mother," Naichi said to Grace when the exchange ended. "She says bringing you here is foolish, that you will bring the white soldiers down upon us. Your mother is wise," Grace said quietly. Naichi's expression hardened. "The soldiers come whether we give them reason or not. At least now, they will know we are not weak." He led her to a small wickiup at the edge of the camp. Inside, Grace found it surprisingly comfortable, the ground covered with woven mats and soft furs, a small fire pit in the center. Through the smoke hole at the top, she could see the brilliant blue sky. "You will stay here," Naichi commanded. "Do not try to leave. The desert will kill you faster than any Apache." "Am I your prisoner, then?" "You are." He paused, seeming to search for words. "You are a message. Your father speaks of his God's love, but his people know only how to take. Now they will know how it feels to have something taken. And when your message is received, what then?" Naichi didn't answer. He turned to leave, then stopped at the entrance. "There is food and water. No harm will come to you if you do not seek it out." Left alone, Grace sank onto one of the mats, finally allowing her tears to fall. She thought of her father, probably sick with worry, rallying the town to search for her. She thought of the violence that would surely follow, the blood that would be shed in her name. The irony wasn't lost on her. She who had spent her life preaching peace was now the cause of war. As the day wore on, hunger eventually drove her to examine the food that had been left. Dried meat, some kind of flatbread, and a paste made from mesquite beans. It was foreign but not unpleasant. As she ate, she became aware of eyes watching her through the wickiup's entrance. A small face peered in. A boy, perhaps 6 or 7 years old, when Grace smiled tentatively. He giggled and darted away, only to return moments later with 2 other children. They whispered among themselves in Apache, clearly debating whether the white woman was dangerous. Grace remembered the small wooden cross she wore on a leather cord around her neck. Slowly, so as not to startle them, she removed it and held it out. The bravest of the children, the boy who'd appeared first, crept forward and took it, examining it with serious concentration. "Cross," Grace said, pointing to it. Then she pointed to herself. "Grace." The boy pointed to himself. "Neatis." He held up the cross, then made a gesture she didn't understand. An older woman appeared, scolding the children and shooing them away. She glared at Grace with undisguised hostility, but Grace noticed she didn't take the cross from the boy. As evening approached, Naichi returned. He brought with him a woman who appeared to be in her 30s, her face marked by some past sorrow. "This is Dakea," he said. "She will see to your needs." Dakea said nothing, but her examination of Grace was thorough and not unkind. She checked Grace's wrists where the bindings had been, clicking her tongue at the slight chafing. From a pouch at her waist, she produced a salve that smelled of sage and something else Grace couldn't identify. "Thank you," Grace said. Dakea's hand stilled for a moment, but she didn't respond. "She does not speak your language," Naichi explained. "Her husband was killed by white soldiers. Her voice died with him." Grace felt a wave of sorrow for the woman. "I'm sorry," she said, looking directly at Dakea. "I'm so very sorry." Something in her tone must have transcended language, because Dakea's harsh expression softened slightly. She finished applying the salve and left without a word. "Your people killed her husband?" Grace asked when they were alone. 3 winters ago. He was hunting, nothing more. The soldiers shot him for sport." Naichi's voice was flat, but rage simmered beneath the surface. "This is your people's love, death for those who dare to exist on land they claim. Not all of us. Enough." He cut her off. "Do not speak to me of good whites and bad whites. To the eagle, all mice look the same." "And is that what I am to you? A mouse?" He looked at her then. Really looked at her. And for a moment his guard dropped. "I don't know what you are." He admitted. "You should cower, but you don't. You should hate. but you show kindness to our children. You are unexpected. My father taught me that fear and hatred are chains that bind us more surely than any rope. Your father is a fool, Nietzsche said harshly. His kindness will not stop bullets or return our land. Perhaps not, Grace agreed. But neither will taking me. Nietzsche's jaw tightened. We shall see. That night, Grace lay on the unfamiliar furs, staring up at the stars through the smoke hole. The sounds of the camp voices, children laughing, dogs barking, were both foreign and oddly comforting. She thought of the families here, not so different from those in Cedar Ridge, all trying to survive in this unforgiving land. She whispered prayers into the darkness, for her father, for the people of her town, and for the first time, for the Apache who held her captive. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and the sound seemed to carry all the loneliness and sorrow of the desert within it. As sleep finally claimed her, Grace's last thought was of Nietzsche's eyes when he'd called her unexpected. Behind the anger and pain, she'd glimpsed something else, a man wrestling with beliefs long held, just as she was wrestling with her own. Perhaps, she thought drowsily, they were all prisoners here, chained by history and hatred neither side knew how to escape. The desert night wrapped around the camp like a blanket, indifferent to the human dramas playing out beneath its vast expanse of stars. The days fell into an unexpected rhythm. Each morning, Dakea arrived with food and water, her silent presence becoming almost companionable. Grace learned to read the subtle changes in the woman's expression, a slight softening around the eyes when Grace attempted a few words in Apache she'd picked up from the children, a barely perceptible nod when Grace helped to clean the wiki up without being asked. On her 4th day in the camp, Nietzsche appeared at dawn. Come, he commanded. You will learn how we live, since you are to be among us. Grace followed him through the camp, aware of the eyes that tracked their movement. Some faces showed open hostility, others curiosity, and a few, particularly among the older women, something that might have been pity. He led her to where a group of women worked, processing the fibrous leaves of yucca plants. Their hands moved with practiced efficiency, stripping the fibers that would be woven into baskets and rope. When Nietzsche spoke to them in Apache, several women protested vehemently. One, younger than the others with a baby strapped to her back, spat at Grace's feet. They do not want to teach the enemy, Nietzsche translated unnecessarily. But an elderly woman, her face deeply lined by years of sun and hardship, spoke sharply to the others. She gestured for Grace to sit beside her, her gnarled hands demonstrating the technique with patient precision. Grace's fingers, soft from years of gentler work, struggled with the tough fibers. The other women laughed, not entirely unkindly, when she winced as the sharp edges cut her palm. The old woman, who Grace learned was called Guyen, showed her how to hold the leaves properly. As the sun climbed higher, the baby on the young woman's back began to cry. The mother tried to soothe the child while continuing to work, but the wails only grew louder. Grace noticed the woman's movements becoming increasingly frustrated. Without thinking, Grace began to hum softly, an old lullaby her mother had sung to her years ago. The melody drifted across the workspace, gentle and soothing. The baby's cries faltered, then stopped. The young mother looked at Grace with surprise, the hostility in her eyes wavering. Your child is beautiful, Grace said, knowing the woman couldn't understand her words but hoping the tone would convey her meaning. Nietzsche watched this exchange with an unreadable expression. You sing to Apache babies as you would to white ones? All babies are the same, Grace replied. They know nothing of hatred, only hunger, cold, and the need for comfort. That afternoon, he took her with a hunting party. You will see how we feed our people, he said, handing her a water skin. Try to keep up. The pace was brutal. The Apache moved through the rocky terrain like shadows, their feet finding purchase where Grace saw only loose stones and thorns. More than once, she stumbled, her long skirts catching on brush and cacti. The warriors said nothing, but she felt their judgment in their silence. They tracked a small herd of deer through a canyon, moving downwind with careful precision. Grace watched in fascination as they communicated through subtle hand signals, positioning themselves for the hunt. When the moment came, their arrows flew true, bringing down 2 young bucks with clean shots. As they prepared to dress the kills, a rattling sound froze Grace's blood. A diamondback rattlesnake, disturbed by their presence, coiled not 3 feet from where little Nitus, the boy who'd been brave enough to take her cross, had wandered from the main group. The child stood paralyzed with fear as the snake's rattle intensified. The warriors were too far away, their hands full with the deer. Without thought, Grace grabbed a long stick and lunged forward, placing herself between the snake and the boy. Her heart hammered as she used the stick to flip the snake away, sending it slithering into the rocks. Nitus flew into her arms, trembling. Grace held him tight, whispering soothing words he couldn't understand, but seemed to feel nonetheless. When she looked up, she found the entire hunting party staring at her. Naichi was the first to speak, his voice gruff. "That was foolish. You could have been bitten." "So could he," Grace replied, still holding the shaking child. One of the warriors, the young one who'd held her during that first terrifying ride, stepped forward. He said something in Apache to Naichi, his tone respectful but firm. Naichi responded sharply, but the warrior persisted, gesturing at Grace and then at Nitus. "What is he saying?" Grace asked. Naichi's jaw tightened. "He says you showed the heart of a mother bear, that perhaps we misjudged." He turned away abruptly. "Come, we must return before dark." The journey back to camp was different. The warriors, while not friendly, no longer radiated the same hostility. One even offered her water without Naichi's prompting. Nitus refused to leave her side, chattering in Apache and showing her interesting rocks and plants along the way. Word of the incident spread quickly through the camp. That evening, Nitus's mother appeared at Grace's wickiup. She was young, perhaps only a few years older than Grace herself, with gentle eyes that reminded Grace of a deer. She carried a bundle wrapped in soft leather. Through gestures and a few Spanish words they both knew, the woman, who introduced herself as Itza, indicated the bundle was a gift. Inside, Grace found a simple but beautifully made dress of soft doeskin, decorated with modest beadwork. "For you," Itza managed in heavily accented English. "For save my son." Tears pricked Grace's eyes. "He's a wonderful boy. You must be very proud." Itza smiled, understanding the tone if not all the words. She gestured at Grace's torn and dirty calico dress, then at the doeskin, making her meaning clear. That night, Naichi found Grace sitting outside her wickiup, wearing the Apache dress. In the firelight, with her hair loose in the foreign garment, she looked... He pushed the thought away before it could fully form. "My people begin to accept you," he said, his tone suggesting this troubled him. "Does that anger you?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I brought you here in anger, to show your father, your people, that we are not weak. But you..." He struggled for words. "You make it harder to see clearly. Perhaps clarity isn't what you thought it was," Grace suggested gently. "Do not speak in riddles like your father." "Then I'll speak plainly. You took me to cause pain, but instead, I've found people not so different from my own. Mothers who love their children, elders who hold wisdom, young ones who know joy despite hardship. If I can see this, why can't others?" "Because seeing requires looking," Naichi said bitterly. "Your people look at us and see only obstacles to their desires. You looked at me and saw only an enemy's daughter." Grace countered. "What do you see now?" He turned to face her fully, and in the flickering light, she saw the battle raging within him. "I see someone who should not exist. You are white, yet you protect Apache children. You are captive, yet you show no hatred. You are..." He stopped, frustration evident in every line of his body. "I am just Grace," she said simply. "And you are just Naichi. Perhaps if we could start there, without the weight of all that came before." "The weight of the past is not so easily set down," he said, but his voice had lost some of its edge. "My father was killed when I was 12. My sister," his voice caught. "She was 14 when the soldiers came to our peaceful camp. What they did before they killed her. There are no words in any language." Grace felt tears slide down her cheeks. "I'm sorry. I'm so very sorry. Your sorrow cannot bring them back." "No," she agreed. "But perhaps it can help prevent others from suffering the same fate." Nietzsche laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You sound like your father. He's a good man who believes in peace. And I am a war chief who believes in survival. We cannot both be right. Can't we?" Grace asked. "Survival without peace is just existing in fear. Peace without strength to defend it is just waiting to die. Perhaps what we need is both." He stared at her for a long moment, then shook his head as if to clear it. "You confuse things that should be simple. Or maybe," Grace said softly, "I clarify things that were never as simple as we wish them to be." Nietzsche left without another word, but Grace noticed he walked more slowly than usual, as if carrying a burden that had suddenly grown heavier. She remained outside, watching the stars and thinking of her father. Was he looking at these same stars, praying for her safety? Did he know that she was not only safe, but finding her world expanded in ways she never expected? The sound of soft footsteps made her turn. Dakea approached, carrying a blanket. The silent woman draped it around Grace's shoulders, then surprised her by sitting down beside her. They sat in companionable silence, two women from different worlds finding common ground in the quiet of the desert night. In the distance, a coyote called, and this time Grace heard not loneliness, but a wild freedom she was only beginning to understand. The tension in Cedar Ridge had reached a breaking point. Thomas Whitfield stood before a crowd of armed men gathered outside the church, their faces hard with determination and rage. 3 weeks had passed since Grace was taken, and patience had worn thinner than morning frost. "Reverend, with all due respect, your prayers ain't bringing your daughter back," Jake Morrison declared, his rifle prominent across his chest. "It's time for action, not words." Behind him, 24 men nodded agreement. They'd spent days gathering weapons, ammunition, and supplies. Samuel Crawford had offered his best horses, while the Barrett family, still grieving their son, had contributed enough provisions for a week's campaign. Thomas raised his hands, his voice carrying the authority of desperation. "Violence will only beget more violence. If we attack their camp, Grace could be caught in the crossfire. Please, let me try once more to negotiate." "Negotiate!" Tom Barrett spat the word like a curse. "Did they negotiate before they took my boy's life? Before they stole your daughter? 'An eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind,'" Thomas quoted, but his words fell on deaf ears. "Then we'll be blind together," Morrison countered. "We ride at dawn. You can come with us or stay here with the women and children. Your choice, Reverend." That night, Thomas knelt in the empty church until his knees ached, praying for wisdom, for Grace's safety, for some path that didn't end in bloodshed. But heaven remained silent, and dawn came too soon. Meanwhile, in the Apache camp, Grace had become aware of a growing crisis. The usual sounds of daily life had taken on an urgent quality. Women gathered in worried clusters, and the warriors spoke in hushed, serious tones. Even the children seemed subdued. Nietzsche appeared at her wickiup, his face grave. "Come, there is something you must see." He led her to a central area where people had gathered. The smell hit her first. Sickness, sharp and unmistakable. Several people lay on blankets, their faces flushed with fever, bodies trembling despite the heat. "The spotted sickness," Nietzsche said grimly. "What your people call measles. It came with traders 2 weeks ago." Grace's heart sank. She'd seen measles sweep through settlements before, but she knew the Apache, with no built immunity, would suffer far worse. Already, she could see the characteristic rash beginning on some of the children. "How many?" she asked. 12 so far. More each day." His voice carried a weight beyond his years. "Our medicine man does what he can, but..." Without hesitation, Grace moved toward the sick. An elderly woman tried to stop her, speaking rapidly in Apache, but Grace gently pushed past. She knelt beside a young girl, perhaps 7 years old, whose fever had her delirious. "I need clean water," Grace said firmly. "Lots of it, and cloths, as many as you can find. The fever must be brought down." Naichi translated her words, and several women hurried to comply, though their expressions showed skepticism. Why should they trust white medicine when whites had brought the disease? Grace worked through the day, showing the Apache women how to cool the fevered bodies with damp cloths, how to coax water between parched lips. She recognized some herbal remedies from her father's teachings and suggested willow bark tea for the fever, surprised when the Apache already knew of it. "Your healing ways and ours are not so different," Guyen observed, watching Grace tend to her grandson. As night fell, Grace found herself exhausted but unable to rest. 3 more people had developed symptoms, including Itza's husband. The young mother who'd given Grace the dress now sat vigil over her husband, Nidus clinging to her side. Naichi found Grace mixing another batch of willow bark tea. "You did not have to do this," he said quietly. "Yes, I did." She met his gaze steadily. "These are children. Naichi, mothers and fathers. How could I not help? They are Apache children, Apache mothers and fathers. Your enemies." "They are people," Grace corrected gently. "Just people?" Something shifted in his expression. "My mother was right. Bringing you here was foolish, but not for the reasons she believed." Before Grace could ask what he meant, a commotion arose from the camp's edge. Scouts had returned, their horses lathered with sweat. They spoke urgently with Naichi, gesturing back the way they come. Naichi's face darkened. "Your people come, armed, many of them." Grace's blood ran cold. "My father? I do not know, but they are 2 days away, perhaps less." He looked at her with something like regret. "I must prepare our warriors." "Please." Grace gripped his arm, surprising them both with the contact. "There has to be another way. If they attack while your people are sick, then we die fighting rather than from disease." But his voice lacked conviction. "Let me go to them," Grace said suddenly. "Let me tell them I'm safe, that I've been treated well. Maybe I can stop this." "No." The refusal was immediate. "You think I am a fool? You would not return." "I would," Grace insisted. "I give you my word. The word of a white woman means nothing." Grace pulled away, stung. "Then you know me as little as I once knew you." She turned back to the sick, but not before she saw the uncertainty flash across his features. The night stretched long and terrible. 2 children died before dawn, their small bodies unable to fight both the disease and the desert heat. Grace wept as she helped prepare them for burial, her tears mingling with those of the grieving families. As the sun rose, painting the red rocks in shades of blood and fire, Naichi made a decision that would haunt him forever. He found Grace sitting with Dakia, the 2 women exhausted from their night's vigil. "You spoke of trust," he said without preamble. "Of seeing people, not enemies. Do you mean these words?" Grace looked up at him, her face streaked with tears and dirt. "With all my heart." "Then prove it." He pulled her to her feet. "Go to your people. Tell them what you have seen here. Tell them," he struggled with the words, "tell them we have sick children who need medicine, not bullets. But know this, if you do not return by sunset tomorrow, we will prepare for war. And this time, no mercy will be shown." Grace stared at him in shock. "You're letting me go." "I am trusting you," he corrected, and the weight of that trust was heavy in his voice. "Do not make me regret it." Within the hour, Grace was mounted on a sturdy pony, dressed once again in her tattered calico dress. The Apache dress was folded carefully in her saddlebag. She couldn't say why she felt the need to keep it. As she prepared to leave, Itza approached, Nidus at her side. The boy pressed something into Grace's hand, her wooden cross, which he'd kept all this time. "Come back," he said in carefully practiced English. "Please." Grace hugged him tightly, then looked at Naichi. "I will return. You have my word, not as a white woman, but as Grace. Just Grace. He nodded once, his face unreadable. Ride fast. And Grace. He paused, seeming to wrestle with himself. Be careful. She rode out of the camp with the sunrise at her back, aware of the eyes watching her go. The weight of trust sat heavy on her shoulders. Naichi's trust that she would return, and the trust of sick children that she would bring help. Halfway to Cedar Ridge, she encountered the armed party. Her father rode at the front beside Jake Morrison, his face aged a decade in 3 weeks. When he saw her, he nearly fell from his horse. Grace, my child! He dismounted and ran to her, pulling her from the pony and into his arms. Are you hurt? Did they harm you? I'm fine. Father, I'm fine. She held him tightly, then pulled back to address the crowd of armed men. Please, you must listen to me. They have sick children, measles. They need help, not violence. Morrison's face darkened. That's their problem, not ours. Stand aside, girl. We've got business to finish. No! Grace planted herself firmly in their path. I gave my word I would return by tomorrow's sunset, with medicine, not weapons. Return? Her father stared at her in disbelief. Grace, you can't mean... I do mean it. She met each man's gaze in turn. I've lived among them for 3 weeks. I've seen their children play, their mothers weep, their fathers struggle to provide in this harsh land. They are not monsters, they are people, just like us. Pretty words, Tom Barrett said coldly. But they won't bring back my son. No, Grace agreed sadly. But killing their children won't bring him back either. It will only create more grieving fathers, more orphans, more hatred. Where does it end? She told them everything about Guyen's patience, Itza's kindness, Nitas's bravery, about Dakea's sorrow and Naichi's struggle between duty and conscience. Some men shifted uncomfortably, while others remained stone-faced. They trust me to return, she concluded. If I break that trust, it will mean war. But if I return with medicine, with proof that not all whites wish them dead, perhaps it can be the beginning of something better. The debate raged for hours. Some men turned back, unwilling to wage war on sick children. Others remained adamant that this was a trick. In the end, it was Thomas who spoke the deciding words. My daughter was taken from me in anger, he said quietly, but she has been returned in trust. How can we do less than honor that trust? I will go with her, along with any medicine we can spare. The rest of you must decide for yourselves. As the sun reached its zenith, Grace set out again for the Apache camp. This time, she was not alone. Her father rode beside her, along with Doc Hensley and, surprisingly, Jake Morrison, whose own daughter had survived measles the previous year. Their saddlebags bulged with medicine and supplies. Behind them, the remaining men made camp, weapons at the ready. They would wait to see if this tentative trust would hold or shatter like so many promises before it. Grace touched the wooden cross at her throat, then the soft doe-skin dress in her bag. Between two worlds, she rode toward an uncertain future, carrying with her the fragile hope that understanding might triumph over hatred, that trust might prove stronger than fear. The desert stretched before them, vast and unforgiving, but somehow less empty than before. The drought came like a thief in the night, stealing what little moisture remained in the land. 2 months had passed since Grace's return to the Apache camp with medicine, and an uneasy truce had settled between the two communities. But now, a greater enemy threatened both Apache and white settler alike, the killing thirst of the desert. Grace had chosen to remain in the Apache camp, acting as a bridge between the two peoples. Her father visited weekly, bringing supplies and news from Cedar Ridge. The measles outbreak had been contained, though not without loss. 7 had died, including 2 children, and the grief still hung heavy over the camp. Now. As Grace walked through the camp in the pre-dawn darkness, she could hear the dry rasp of wind through dead brush. The stream that fed the valley had dwindled to a muddy trickle, then to nothing. The springs were failing one by one. Even the hardy desert plants were beginning to wither. Naichi stood at the edge of camp, staring at the lightening sky. No clouds, There had been no clouds for weeks. "How long can your people last?" Grace asked, joining him. "Perhaps 2 weeks with strict rationing, less if the heat grows worse." His voice was steady, but she'd learned to read the tension in his shoulders. "We will have to move soon. Search for water elsewhere. The settlement is no better off," Grace said. "Father says they're already talking of abandoning Cedar Ridge. Then we are all equal before the drought," Nietzsche observed with bitter humor. "Apache. White. The desert cares nothing for the color of the throats it parches." As the sun rose, bringing with it another day of merciless heat, the camp stirred to life. Women emerged with water vessels, carefully measuring out the precious liquid. Children, usually boisterous, moved listlessly in whatever shade they could find. Grace made her rounds, checking on those still recovering from the measles. In one wiki-up, she found old Guyen tending to her grandson. The boy's lips were cracked, his eyes dull. "We must find water soon," Guyen said simply, "or we will return to the earth that made us." That afternoon, Nietzsche called a council. The warriors and elders gathered, their faces grave. Grace sat at the edge of the group, not fully accepted but no longer excluded. The debate was heated, with some advocating for raiding the settlement's wells, others for moving the entire camp north. "The whites will have guards on their water," one warrior argued. "It would mean bloodshed. Better to die fighting than watching our children wither," another countered. Grace stood, her heart pounding. She'd learned enough Apache to follow the discussion. Though she still spoke carefully, there might be another way. The council turned to her, expressions ranging from skeptical to curious. "My mother came from farming people back east," she continued in English, with Nietzsche translating. She told stories of finding water in dry lands. There are signs, the way certain plants grow, the color of rocks, places where animals gather even when no water is visible. An elder scoffed. "We know our land. White woman. If there was hidden water, we would have found it." "Perhaps," Grace said, "but my people and yours look for different signs." "What if we combined our knowledge?" Nietzsche considered this. "What do you propose?" "Let me lead a searching party. Apache scouts who know the land, and me with the knowledge my mother passed down. If we work together." The debate continued, but eventually, pragmatism won. They had little to lose by trying. The next morning, Grace set out with 3 Apache scouts, including the young warrior who'd first brought her to the camp. She'd learned his name was Closen. Nietzsche led the group, having insisted on coming despite the elders' protests that the chief should remain with the people. They searched through the morning, following game trails and examining rock formations. Grace looked for the signs her mother had described, certain minerals that indicated underground water, the particular green of plants with deep roots, the way morning dew collected in specific places. By midday, the heat was overwhelming. They rested in the shade of a large boulder, sharing careful sips from their water skins. "This is foolishness," Closen muttered, "chasing the dreams of a white woman while our people thirst." "Peace," Nietzsche commanded, but Grace could see he, too, was beginning to doubt. As they prepared to continue, Grace noticed something, a small cluster of mesquite trees in a depression, their leaves slightly greener than the surrounding vegetation. More telling was a formation of white rocks nearby, limestone, if she wasn't mistaken. "There," she pointed. "We dig there." The men exchanged glances but followed her direction. Using knives in their hands, they began to excavate. The earth was hard-packed, resistant. An hour passed, then 2. Just as Closen was about to voice another protest, his knife struck something different. Mud, wet mud. Working with renewed energy, they widened the hole. Water began to seep in. Not much, but water nonetheless. Nietzsche cupped some in his hands, tasting carefully. "It's good," he said, wonder in his voice. "It's good water." They marked the spot carefully and searched the surrounding area, finding 2 more promising locations before exhaustion forced them to return. The camp received them with desperate hope, and work parties were immediately organized to develop the water sources. It wasn't enough to end the drought, but it might be enough to survive it. That night, as Grace helped distribute the first of the new water, Itza approached her. The woman pressed a beautifully beaded necklace into Grace's hands. "You save us twice now," Itza said in her improving English. "First from sickness, now from thirst. You are, how you say, blessed one." "I'm just someone who listened to her mother's stories," Grace replied, but she accepted the gift with gratitude. Later, she found Naichi standing alone by one of the new wells, watching it slowly fill. "Your people's knowledge saved Apache lives today," he said without turning. "Just as your people's knowledge of the land made it possible," Grace replied. "Neither would have succeeded alone." He faced her then, and in the moonlight, she could see the walls he'd built beginning to crack. "You confuse the world I thought I knew. Enemies are supposed to be enemies. Clear, simple. But I'm not your enemy," Grace said softly. "I never was." "No," he agreed, his voice rough. "You are something far more dangerous." "What's that?" He didn't answer directly. Instead, he said, "Guyen calls you she who bridges, the one who stands between two peoples. It is a heavy burden." "I don't stand between," Grace corrected. "I stand with your people and mine, because I've learned something in these months. We're not really two peoples. We're one people who've forgotten how to see each other." Naichi reached out, almost touching her face before catching himself. "The drought will end eventually. What then? Will this peace hold when water flows again and old grievances resurface?" "I don't know," Grace admitted. "But isn't it worth trying to build something that might last?" The next days brought a fragile cooperation. Men from Cedar Ridge, led by Thomas and Doc Hensley, arrived with drilling equipment. Working alongside Apache scouts, they developed the water sources more efficiently. It wasn't easy. Distrust ran deep on both sides. But the common enemy of drought forced them to set aside their differences, at least temporarily. Grace moved between the groups, translating not just words, but intentions, soothing wounded pride and fearful hearts. She saw her father working beside Naiche, the two men slowly developing a wary respect. She watched Apache children teach white children which cacti held moisture, while the settler women shared their techniques for purifying questionable water. One evening, as both communities gathered to share a meal by the main well, Grace realized something had shifted. The change was subtle. Apache and white still sat in separate groups, but the space between them had narrowed. A few tentative conversations crossed the divide. When Nitus approached one of the settler children to show him a lizard he'd caught, no one pulled the boys apart. But it was the moment when Jake Morrison's daughter, little Sarah, offered her cup of water to an Apache elder that tears came to Grace's eyes. The old man accepted with dignity, blessing the child in Apache before drinking. "Look," Grace whispered to Naichi, who stood beside her. "Do you see it?" "See what?" "Hope," she said simply. "Just hope." That night, under stars that seemed to shine more kindly on the drought-stricken land, Grace sat between the two camps. She wore her Apache dress but kept her cross visible, no longer torn between two worlds but choosing to embrace both. Naichi joined her, as she'd known he would. "The water we found will not last forever," he said. "When the drought breaks, your people will return to their town, and mine will resume our wandering." "What of us then?" Grace looked at him, this proud warrior whose wild soul had indeed been chained, not by her touch alone, but by the possibility of a different future. "Then we keep building bridges," she said. "One conversation, one kindness, one shared cup of water at a time. And you," his voice was carefully neutral, "where will you go?" She smiled, thinking of all the impossible things that had already come to pass. "Wherever I'm needed most, after all, bridges are only useful if someone's willing to stand on them." The drought would last 3 more weeks before the blessed rains finally came. But in that time, in the crucible of shared hardship, something new was forged. Not perfect trust, not the end of all conflict, but the beginning of understanding. And sometimes, Grace thought as she watched the two communities slowly, carefully learning to work together, Beginnings were all you needed. The first shot shattered the dawn peace like thunder in a clear sky. Grace jolted awake in her wickiup, her heart hammering as screams erupted throughout the camp. She scrambled outside to find chaos Apache warriors rushing for weapons, women gathering children, and in the growing light, she could see them, armed riders from Cedar Ridge. But not just from her town. These were strangers too, men with hard faces and harder hearts. Grace! Nietzsche appeared through the smoke of cooking fires, kicked over in panic. Blood ran down his arm from a graze. Get to safety! What's happening? But even as she asked, she knew. The fragile peace had shattered. Raiders from the southern settlements. They heard about our water, about whites helping Apache. His face was granite. They came to cleanse the territory. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions. Grace saw Closen fall, clutching his chest. Without thinking, she ran to him, dragging him behind an overturned wagon. His eyes were already glazing. Tell my son." He gasped, but death took him before he could finish. Through the melee, Grace spotted her father. Thomas had ridden in with the attackers, trying desperately to stop them. He stood between the groups, arms raised, shouting for ceasefire, but his words were lost in the violence. A raider aimed at a fleeing Apache woman carrying her baby. Grace recognized Itza and didn't hesitate. She threw herself forward, pushing Itza down as the bullet whined overhead. They tumbled together, the baby wailing. "Run!" Grace shouted. "Take Nidus and run!" But there was nowhere to run. The attackers had surrounded the camp. She saw Jake Morrison among them, his face twisted with something between rage and shame, firing but aiming high. Not all the Cedar Ridge men were participating willingly, she realized. Some had been swept up in the mob mentality, others coerced. Nietzsche rallied his warriors, forming a defensive line. Despite being caught off guard, they fought with desperate fury. But they were outnumbered, and the attackers had better weapons. Grace found herself in the horrible position of recognizing faces on both sides. Apaches she'd come to care for, settlers she'd known since childhood. This wasn't war between strangers, but a shattering of the very bridges she'd helped build. A rider bore down on a group of Apache children huddled by the ceremonial fire pit. Without thinking, Grace grabbed a still-burning branch and swung it at the horse, causing it to rear. The rider, a man she didn't recognize, tumbled off, cursing. "You Apache-loving witch!" He raised his gun toward her. The shot that saved her life came from an unexpected source. Jake Morrison's rifle cracked, and the stranger's weapon flew from his hand. "Enough!" Morrison roared. "We came for the Apache, not to shoot our own." The momentary confusion gave Thomas another chance. The Reverend had found a bell somewhere and was ringing it frantically, the sound cutting through the gunfire. "Stop this madness! In God's name, stop!" Some of the Cedar Ridge men began to lower their weapons. Uncertainty replacing bloodlust, but the outside raiders weren't interested in mercy. Their leader, a scarred man named Hollis, spat tobacco juice and raised his rifle again. "Any white who stands with savages is a traitor," he declared. "Clear them all out." That's when Grace did something that would be remembered in stories for generations. She walked into the space between the two groups, that dangerous, deadly ground where bullets crossed. She walked slowly, deliberately, her hands empty and raised. "Look at me," she called out, her voice carrying surprising strength. "I'm Grace Whitfield, daughter of the Reverend, white woman, and I stand with these people because I've lived with them, learned from them, seen their children play and their mothers weep. They saved me from thirst. I've saved them from sickness. We are bound together now." "Then you'll die together," Hollis snarled. But Thomas moved to stand beside his daughter. Then Doc Hensley. Then, surprisingly, Morrison. "You'll have to go through us first," Morrison said quietly. "And I'm done with killing for today." The Apache, seeing this, began to move as well. Nietzsche stepped forward, blood still running down his arm. Guyen, ancient and dignified, joined him. Then Dakia, silent but resolute. Soon, the two groups were intermingled, making it impossible to fire without hitting everyone. "You fools!" Hollis raged. "You choose savages over your own kind. I choose neighbors over strangers," Thomas said firmly. "I choose peace over more bloodshed. These people have shown more Christianity in their actions than you have with your guns." The standoff stretched taut. Some of Hollis's men began to shift uncomfortably. They'd come expecting easy slaughter, not to face other whites willing to die for Apache lives. Then came the sound of horses, many horses. Over the ridge appeared a sight that made everyone freeze, a full cavalry unit, guidons fluttering in the morning breeze. At their head rode a captain Grace recognized, Captain Samuel Aldridge, a fair man who'd mediated disputes before. "What in God's name is happening here?" the captain demanded. Taking in the scene, the mixed group of Apache and whites standing together, the raiders with weapons drawn, the bodies already fallen. Hollis tried to speak first. "Captain, we're clearing out a nest of hostiles who've corrupted good Christian folk." "The only hostiles I see," Aldridge interrupted coldly, "are men who attacked a peaceful camp containing women and children, and from what I can observe, both white women and children." "Sir," Thomas stepped forward, "these Apache have been living peacefully. We've been working together to survive the drought. This attack was unprovoked." The captain's eyes swept the scene again, noting how Apache and settler stood intermingled. "Reverend Whitfield, is that your daughter standing with the Apache chief?" "It is," Thomas confirmed, "and I stand with her choice." Aldridge was silent for a long moment. Then, "Hollis, you and your men will disperse immediately. Any man who fires another shot will be arrested for murder. Is that clear?" "You can't be serious." "Dead serious." The captain's hand rested on his sidearm. "I have orders to maintain peace in this territory. That means protecting all its inhabitants, regardless of color." Grumbling, threatening, but ultimately unwilling to face the cavalry, Hollis and his raiders began to withdraw. Some of the Cedar Ridge men who'd been swept up in the attack looked ashamed, avoiding eye contact with their neighbors. As the immediate danger passed, the cost became clear. 7 Apache lay dead, including Closen and 2 women. 3 children were wounded. On the raiders' side, 2 were dead, several injured. The ground was soaked with blood that the thirsty earth drank indifferently. Grace moved among the wounded. Her dress, she wore white woman's clothing today, cruel irony, soon stained red. She worked alongside Guyen and Doc Hensley, Apache medicine and white medicine side by side, trying to save who they could. It was while treating a wounded Apache child that it happened. One of Hollis's men, lingering behind the rest, raised his rifle for one last shot of vengeance. Naichi saw him, saw where he aimed, at Grace, bent over the child. The Apache chief didn't hesitate. He threw himself forward, taking the bullet meant for her. Grace heard the shot, felt Naichi's weight knock her aside, and turned to see him falling. "No!" The word tore from her throat as she caught him, his blood hot on her hands. "No, no, no!" The cavalry reacted instantly. The shooter subdued before he could fire again, but Grace saw none of it. Her world had narrowed to Naichi's face, the light already fading from his eyes. "Why?" she whispered, pressing her hands against the wound, knowing it was too deep, too close to his heart. "You asked," he coughed, blood on his lips, "what you were to me. More than enemy, more than friend. You are." "Don't," Grace begged. "Save your strength, Doc Hensley." But Naichi gripped her hand with failing strength. "The chain you put on my soul, I wear it, willingly." She held him as his breath grew shallow, as warriors who'd followed him in battle knelt around them, as her father prayed and her tears fell like the rain they'd all prayed for. "Please don't leave," Grace whispered. "We have so much work still to do, so many bridges to build." Naichi's hand touched her face, gentle despite his warrior's calluses. "Build them for me." When his hand fell, when the great heart finally stopped beating, A keening rose from the Apache women that seemed to pierce the very sky. Grace didn't realize she was screaming too until her father's arms wrapped around her, pulling her back as Apache hands reached for their fallen chief. The two groups faced each other over Naichi's body. Apache and White, united moments ago, now separated again by death. The bridge Grace had spoken of seemed to crumble, each timber falling into the chasm of loss and renewed hatred. But then Nguyen, tears streaming down her weathered face, reached across Naichi's body and took Grace's blood-stained hand. "You loved him," the old woman said in English. "He loved you. This must not be for nothing." Captain Aldridge, who had watched it all, removed his hat. His men followed suit. "This man died saving a white woman's life," he said loudly. "Let the record show that. Let it be remembered." Grace looked down at Naichi's still face, at the mingled blood on her dress. His, the wounded child's, others she'd tried to save. The sun climbed higher, indifferent to human grief. And she understood with terrible clarity that peace was not a destination but a choice that must be made again and again, often at the highest cost. "For you," she whispered to Naichi. "I'll keep building, I promise." The wickiup that had become Grace's second home now held a different purpose. Naichi lay on a bed of soft furs, his body cleaned and dressed in his finest war shirt, the one his mother had made years ago. Eagle feathers adorned his hair, and his weapons lay beside him, a chief prepared for his final journey. But he was not dead, not yet. The bullet had lodged near his heart, too deep and dangerous for Doc Hensley's frontier medicine. The doctor had stopped the bleeding, but infection was setting in. Naichi drifted between consciousness and delirium, his breathing shallow and labored. Grace hadn't left his side in 3 days. She bathed his fevered face, dripped water between his cracked lips, and whispered prayers in both English and the Apache words she'd learned. Around her, the camp maintained a vigil. Women sang low, mournful songs while warriors stood guard, as if they could protect their chief from death itself. "You need rest," Nguyen said, entering with a bowl of herb-scented broth. "You cannot heal him by destroying yourself." "I can't leave him," Grace replied, her voice hoarse. "He saved my life. He saved more than that," the old woman said cryptically. She settled beside Grace, studying Naichi's still face. In the old days, before the white man came, there were stories of warriors who walked between life and death. Some returned, some did not. The choice was theirs to make. What brought them back? Nguyen's eyes glinted. Something worth living for. That night, as the moon rose full and bright, Naichi's fever spiked dangerously. He thrashed, speaking in Apache, reliving battles and losses. Grace caught names: his sister, his father, warriors who'd fallen. His anguish was terrible to witness. Then, suddenly, he spoke in English. "Grace. Where is Grace?" "I'm here," she said, gripping his hand. "I'm right here." His eyes opened but didn't seem to see her. "The white woman who is not white, the enemy who is not enemy. You confuse the world." "Rest," Grace urged. But he continued, caught in some fevered vision. "I see them, my ancestors. They call me. My father stands with them. And my sister." His voice broke. "She says the pain will end. The fighting will end. I can rest." "No," Grace said firmly. "Not yet. We have work to do. Remember? Bridges to build." Naichi's unfocused gaze found hers. "I'm tired of building with blood and ash. Tired of burying children." Grace felt tears sliding down her cheeks. "Then build with hope. Build with me." He was quiet for so long she thought he'd slipped away again. Then, barely audible, "The chain. It pulls both ways." Doc Hensley arrived near dawn. Captain Aldridge with him? The captain had delayed his departure, ostensibly to maintain order, but Grace suspected he was as caught up in this strange drama as everyone else. "How is he?" the doctor asked, checking Naichi's pulse. "Dying," Grace said bluntly. "The infection's spreading." Hensley's expression confirmed her fears. "I've seen men survive worse, but," he shook his head, "it would take a miracle." "Then we make one," Grace said. An idea had been forming, born of desperation and memory. Doctor, didn't you tell me once about doctors back east who've had success with certain molds? Bread mold, specifically, for treating infections. Hensley frowned. It's experimental at best, unproven, and we'd need specific conditions. We have caves. Guyen interrupted, having listened intently. Sacred caves where we store grain, always damp, always cool. Things grow there, green and blue things on old bread. The doctor and the medicine woman exchanged glances, years of prejudice momentarily set aside by professional curiosity. It's worth trying, Hensley admitted, but the preparation would be crucial. Too much could poison him, too little would be useless. Then we work together, Grace said. All of us. What followed was perhaps the strangest medical collaboration the frontier had ever seen. Guyen led them to the sacred caves, where generations of Apache had stored food. There, in the cool darkness, they found what they sought, bread covered in blue-green mold, working by lamplight. Doc Hensley showed them how to carefully scrape the mold, while Guyen added her knowledge of preparation methods passed down through generations. Grace translated between them, ensuring nothing was lost in communication. My grandmother spoke of such things. Guyen mused as they worked. Healing from corruption, life from decay. The world is full of strange medicine if we have eyes to see. They prepared a poultice and a weak tea from the mold, following both Hensley's medical knowledge and Guyen's traditional wisdom. It was dangerous. They all knew it. But doing nothing meant certain death. When they returned to Naichi, they found Thomas there, Bible in hand. He'd been reading aloud, not preaching, just sharing stories of healing and hope. Reverend, Captain Aldridge said, clearly uncomfortable. I'm not sure it's appropriate. Let him. Guyen said sharply, all medicine is welcome here. White God, Apache spirits, healing mold. We deny nothing that might help. They applied the poultice to Naichi's wound and coaxed the tea between his lips. Then came the waiting. That night, the entire camp seemed to hold its breath. Apache and the whites who'd remained all kept vigil in their own ways. Grace saw Jake Morrison teaching Nidus to whittle, the big man's hands gentle as he guided the boy's smaller ones. She saw her father sitting with Dakia, the two in companionable silence, united by the understanding of loss. Near midnight, Naichi's fever broke. His breathing, while still labored, grew steadier. When dawn came, he opened his eyes, truly opened them, seeing clearly for the first time in days. Grace, he whispered. She was there instantly, tears flowing freely. I'm here. The chains, he said, and for a moment her heart sank, thinking him still delirious. But then he continued, I understand now. The chains that bind us, they can be hatred or they can be love. We choose which we forge. Over the following days, Naichi's recovery was slow but steady. The infection retreated, whether from the mold treatment, Guyen's herbs, the prayers, or simple stubborn will to live. No one could say for certain. During this time, something shifted in the dynamic between the two communities. The shared crisis had broken down walls that violence had failed to breach. Doc Hensley began exchanging medical knowledge with Guyen. Thomas organized joint prayer services that acknowledged both traditions. Even Morrison, gruff as ever, was seen helping repair wiki-ups damaged in the raid. Captain Aldridge, who'd extended his stay to monitor the situation, made a point of eating meals with both groups. I'll be making my report to Fort Grant, he told them one evening. I'll be recommending this area be designated as a peace zone. Any violence from either side will be met with military intervention. What about Hollis and his men? Morrison asked. Wanted for murder and incitement. Aldridge replied with satisfaction. They won't be troubling you again. On the seventh day, Naichi was strong enough to sit up. Grace was beside him, as she'd been throughout his ordeal. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the camp go about its daily business. Apache women and white women working side by side, children playing together, men planning a joint hunting expedition. Your father was here, Naichi said eventually, reading from his book. He spoke of a man named Lazarus. Raised from the dead, Grace confirmed. Though you were never quite dead. Wasn't I? Naichi's expression was thoughtful. The man I was, the one who lived only for vengeance. I think he did die in that fevered darkness. What remains? He looked at her. What remains must learn to live differently. We'll learn together, Grace said. He took her hand, studying it. In my fever, I saw many things, past and future mixed together. I saw war without end, children growing up to hate as their fathers hated. But I also saw another path, difficult, painful sometimes, but possible. Tell me. I saw Apache and White working together as we did during the drought. I saw our children learning both ways, strong in two traditions instead of lost between them. I saw... He paused, then continued more quietly. I saw you and me, building something new. Not Apache, not White, but something born from both. Grace's heart raced, but she kept her voice steady. And what did you decide? Seeing all that? That the second path, however difficult, is worth any price. He raised her hand to his lips, a gesture that would have been unthinkable weeks ago. Grace Whitfield, you came to us as a captive. You stayed as a friend. Could you consider remaining as more? Before she could answer, a commotion arose outside. Itza burst in, eyes wide with excitement. Come, both of you, the rains! They helped Naichi outside, Grace supporting him, and stopped in wonder. Clouds, real heavy clouds, were building on the horizon. The wind carried the unmistakable scent of moisture. The entire camp erupted in celebration as the first fat drops began to fall. Apache and White alike turned their faces to the sky, laughing and crying together. Children danced in the quickly forming puddles, while adults held out containers to catch the precious water. In the midst of the celebration, Naiche pulled Grace close. Is this a sign, do you think? She looked around at the mixed crowd, at her father embracing Guyen, at Morrison lifting Apache children so they could catch raindrops on their tongues, at Captain Aldridge removing his uniform jacket to dance with Dakea in the rain. Yes, she said, rain and tears mingling on her face. I think it is. As thunder rolled across the desert and lightning painted the sky, Naiche kissed her, there, in front of everyone, Apache chief and minister's daughter, while the drought broke at last. Some cheered, some looked scandalized, but most simply continued their celebration, accepting this as one more miracle in a season of impossible things. The chains that bind us, Grace whispered against his lips, thinking of all they'd endured to reach this moment. Let them be strong, Naiche replied, for they must hold two peoples together. The rain fell harder, washing away blood and tears, nourishing the thirsty earth, promising new growth where only death had seemed possible. And in that moment, with the desert blooming around them and their people united in joy, anything seemed possible. The desert had transformed, where once only dust and thorns had ruled. Now wildflowers carpeted the valleys in brilliant purples and yellows. The rains had been generous, filling arroyos and bringing life back to the land. 3 months had passed since that momentous day when Naiche had kissed Grace in the rain, and the changes went far deeper than the blooming landscape. Grace stood at the edge of the merged settlement, for that's what it had become. No longer separate camps eyeing each other with suspicion, but a community where Wickiup stood alongside wooden buildings, where the smoke from Apache cooking fires mingled with that from settler chimneys. It wasn't without its challenges, but it was working. Grace! Nidus ran up to her, speaking in a mixture of Apache and English that had become common among the children. Father Thomas says come. Important meeting. She smiled at the boy's use of Father Thomas. The Apache children had adopted her father as a grandfather figure, much to his delight. Following Nidus, she found a crowd gathered in the central area that served both communities. Captain Aldridge was there, having returned with several officials from Fort Grant. Beside him stood a man in a dark suit who looked profoundly uncomfortable in the desert heat. Thomas and Naiche waited near the speaking platform they'd built for community gatherings. Naiche had recovered fully, though he bore new scars. He stood tall and proud, but there was a gentleness to him now that hadn't been there before. When he saw Grace, his face softened in a way that still made her heart flutter. "What's happening?" Grace asked, joining them. "The government man," Nietzsche said with careful neutrality. "He brings papers." The suited man, introduced as Mr. Harold Pemberton from the Bureau of Indian Affairs, cleared his throat nervously. The crowd fell silent, Apache and white alike waiting to hear what new disaster the government might be bringing. "I have been sent to investigate reports of unusual cooperation in this region," Pemberton began, consulting his notes. "Reports of Apache and white settlers living together, sharing resources, even—" He looked up, his gaze finding Grace and Nietzsche standing close together. "Intermarrying." A ripple of tension went through the crowd. Government attention rarely meant good things for Apache people. However, Pemberton continued, and something in his tone made people lean forward. "I have also received numerous letters from Captain Aldridge, Reverend Whitfield, and even," he seemed surprised by this, "from Apache leaders, translated by Miss Grace Whitfield. These letters speak of a peace that is held despite provocations, of cooperation that has benefited both communities, of a model that might—" He paused, as if hardly believing his own words. "That might serve as an example for other regions." Thomas stepped forward. "What are you saying, Mr. Pemberton?" The government man straightened his papers. "I am authorized to offer official recognition of this community as a special administrative zone. The Apache here would be granted rights to remain on this land permanently, with legal protection. The white settlers would receive government support for infrastructure and development. Both communities would govern jointly, with the disputes mediated by appointed representatives from each group." The silence was deafening. Then Nguyen's voice cut through, sharp with decades of broken promises. "Government words are wind. They promise, then take, always take." "Not this time," Captain Aldridge interjected. "I've made sure of that. The papers are ironclad, witnessed by military command. Any violation would bring federal intervention to protect the agreement, not break it." Nietzsche studied the captain's face, then nodded slowly. "And what does the government want in return for this generosity?" Pemberton actually smiled. "Peace. Simply peace. You've achieved something here that millions in military spending hasn't, a sustainable truce. If we can replicate this elsewhere—" "It can't be replicated," Grace said, stepping forward. All eyes turned to her. "Not the way you think. This didn't happen because of policies or strategies. It happened because people chose to see each other as human, because we bled together, thirsted together, grieved together. You can't mandate that, but we can protect it where it grows." Pemberton replied, "Will you accept?" The debate that followed was intense but civil. Apache elders huddled with warriors, while the settler families gathered in their own groups. Then, in a move that would have been impossible months ago, the groups merged, discussing across cultural lines. Finally, Nietzsche and Thomas stood together. "We accept," they said in unison, "with conditions." The conditions were hammered out over the next hours: guarantees of religious freedom, protection of Apache customs, shared access to water and grazing rights, education that honored both traditions. Pemberton, to his credit, agreed to most demands, negotiating only on minor points. As the sun set, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson, the documents were signed. Grace watched her father and Nietzsche put their marks on the paper, followed by other leaders from both communities. It felt momentous and strangely anticlimactic at the same time. Later, as the community celebrated with a feast combining Apache fry bread and settler apple pies, Grace found herself walking with Nietzsche to their favorite overlook. The valley spread below them, cook fires twinkling like stars brought to earth. "Do you think it will last?" she asked. "Nothing lasts forever," Nietzsche replied philosophically. "But perhaps it will last long enough for our children to see a different way." "Our children?" Grace turned to him, eyebrow raised. He smiled, that rare, full smile that transformed his warrior's face. I spoke with your father today, asked for his blessing in the White Way, as I already asked my mother's in the Apache way. Grace's breath caught. And your father quoted something about Ruth and Naomi, said something about your people becoming my people. Then he cried. Naichi seemed puzzled by this. Happy tears, he said. They were, Grace assured him, feeling her own eyes mist. So you're asking, instead of answering directly. Naichi pulled something from his pouch. 2 rings, one of silver traded from Mexico, one woven from sweetgrass in the Apache tradition. Grace Whitfield, you came to us as a captive and became our salvation. You showed me that chains of hate could become bonds of love. Will you join your life with mine, in both our traditions, before both our peoples? Yes, she said, no hesitation, no doubt. Yes to all of it. He slipped both rings onto her finger, the silver and the sweetgrass intertwined. Below them, someone must have noticed, because cheers erupted from the settlement. Apache ululation mixed with settler whoops, creating a joyful chaos that spoke of unity more than any government document could. There's something else, Naiche said when the noise died down. Guyen has been teaching the young ones, Apache and White together. She needs help. I thought, if you're willing. A school? Grace's eyes lit up. Teaching both traditions. Everything, Naichi confirmed. Apache survival skills and white letters, our stories and your father's Bible stories. Making citizens of 2 worlds, strong in both. Grace kissed him, pouring all her hope and love into the gesture. It's perfect. As they made their way back to the settlement, hand in hand, they passed the graveyard where Closen and the others who died in the raid were buried. Grace paused, laying wildflowers on each grave. They should have lived to see this, she said softly. They did see it. Naichi replied, every choice to trust instead of hate, every hand extended across the divide. They made this possible. We honor them by living the peace they died for. The celebration continued late into the night. Grace danced Apache dances in her doe-skin dress, while Naichi attempted a Virginia reel, much to everyone's amusement. Thomas preached joy while Guyen sang blessing songs. Children fell asleep in mixed groups. Apache and White tangled together like puppies, seeing no difference worth noting. As dawn approached, Grace stood once more looking out over their small piece of the world. It wasn't paradise. There would still be conflicts, misunderstandings, the weight of history to carry, but it was hope made real, a living testament that enemies could become family, that the cycle of vengeance could be broken. No regrets? Naichi asked, joining her, wrapping a blanket around them both against the desert's pre-dawn chill. None, Grace said firmly. We've built something beautiful here. The bridge you spoke of, he agreed. Though different than you imagined. I think better, she corrected, because we built it together. The sun rose, painting the desert in shades of possibility. Somewhere in the settlement, a baby cried, Apache or White. It didn't matter. They were all children of this harsh, beautiful land now, bound together by choice and circumstance, by water shared and bloodshed, by sorrow transformed into joy. Grace thought of that long-ago day when Naichi had taken her from the church, both of them trapped by history's chains. Now those same chains, transformed by love and understanding, bound not just 2 people, but 2 peoples in a covenant of hope. What are you thinking? Naichi asked. That every ending is also a beginning, Grace replied. And this is a very good beginning indeed. As the settlement stirred to life, Apache and White voices mingling in the morning air, Grace and Naichi walked hand in hand toward their future uncertain, challenging, but bright with promise. The wild soul had indeed been chained, but in the binding had found freedom, and in that freedom, 2 peoples had found a way to become one. The desert bloomed around them, testament to what was possible when hearts opened like flowers after rain, reaching always toward the light. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey through the Old West, where love conquered the deepest divides and two peoples found a way to become one. I hope this story of Grace and Nietzsche touched your heart as much as it touched mine while sharing it with you. I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect across the miles, just like our characters connected across cultures. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel for more powerful stories of love, redemption, and hope in the American frontier. Share your thoughts about Grace and Nietzsche's journey. What moment moved you the most? Your comments mean the world to me, and I read every single one. Until our next adventure, keep believing in the power of love to change the world.